Hi everyone, the conversation with Nadine Matheson is currently on a little summer break, but don't worry, I'll be back with brand new episodes in September. But in the meantime, I'll be sharing some fan favourite episodes from season 3, along with a few special conversations from Page 1, the writer's podcast, that I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you so much for all your support throughout season 3. It's been amazing to see the podcast grow, and I'm truly grateful to everyone who's listened, shared and supported us, especially those of you who've bought me a cup of coffee on Ko-fi. It really does make a difference. Now, as always, sit back, we'll go for a walk and enjoy this summer break conversation.
Hello and welcome to episode 199 of Page 1, the Writers' Podcast. I'm Tariq.
I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And episode 199, Tariq.
Oh, it's exciting stuff. What comes after that? The big 200.
Yeah,
oh, very
indeed.
Exciting. What a surprise we have in store. So surprising. Nobody will be more surprised.
It's a surprise to me, I have
than
to
us.
say. Yeah, exactly. We've got what we've got in store for episode 200. But no, genuinely,
goodness,
I suppose it's a good time to say thank you to everyone that does tune in and listen to this podcast, because I certainly know, personally speaking, that I never thought we'd get to episode 199 and have the opportunity to speak to so many of the great authors.
I hope we wouldn't.
Yeah, exactly. So many of the authors, screenwriters, comic writers, all the guests we've had on have been phenomenal. I'm always amazed that they want to tune in and speak to us. But I hope as well that the podcast is useful for the listeners as well, if you are an aspiring writer or if you just like listening to authors talking about their process. We're going to break before episode 200. There will be a break while we prepare that extra special episode.
Yes.
But we are ending on a high, I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely. We're chatting this week with the incredible Deborah Harkness, who has written A Discovery of Witches. It's perhaps her most famous book, the first of the All Souls series. It came out in 2011 and it was a massive success. It was adapted by Sky.
Reprinted 3 times in the first week of publication.
That is, you know how many you must sell that quick? It's mental. That's such incredible numbers. And she talks about how she got into writing A Discovery of Witches. This kind of thought experiment of just seeing a lot of books in the bookshop.
Yeah, that's right. She had no real ambition to write a story, and then happened. I think it was a rainy holiday or something, and she walked into a bookshop, saw all these books about, I think it was specifically books like Twilight and things like that, and it sort of struck her as a historian who had studied people like John Dee who were obsessed with the supernatural. She found it very strange that now, in the 21st century, people are obsessed with the supernatural, albeit in a slightly different way, I guess. But, that led her on, as she says, that thought experiment into beginning to write what became the Discovery of Witches. And in fact, she tells us that the original trilogy of books was one book that she wrote initially. And then it was in 3 parts, and then it was divided up into the 3 separate books. So,
and it just shows you that, there's always people telling you don't chase trends.
Yeah.
By the time you write your book, the trend will be well and truly over. I mean, as always, there's an exception that proves.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this in the podcast, which she wasn't chasing a trend, which maybe helped. I think as we discuss in the podcast, spoilers, but writing something that you actually want to write, that you're interested in, that is authentic. That's the important thing. Now, if it happens to be part of a trend or not, then that's not important. As long as what you're writing is good and from the heart, I guess. So, yeah, it's a really fun chat. Deborah's a lot of fun to speak with. So we will get straight into it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
I always start these, I get a bit of jip for this, but I always start these podcasts with the same question, which is, did you always want to be a writer?
No, I did not. It was, I wanted to be a university president.
Okay.
That was my ambition. And I sort of discovered that I needed an advanced degree to do that. So I went to graduate school and I got my doctorate. And along the way, I learned that writing was very, very hard. And that as a historian, basically 1/3 of my professional life would be researching and writing. And it was one of the reasons I thought, well, I'd rather be a college president because that part is really hard. But it turns out I fell in love with the teaching. And so 1/3 of my life is administration. I'm not a president, but still 1/3 is writing and research and 1/3 is teaching. And the teaching is what made me embrace the writing more. I admired writers, but no, I've never taken a creative writing class. Ever.
So, yeah, and obviously, as you say, with that job came writing and stuff like that. And I think you published John Dee's Conversations with Angels, a non-fiction book, was first. But well, first of all, how did that come about? Was that through the job that you were able to get that published?
In America, you need to have at least one published book for tenure, and another one for promotion to full professor. So John Dee was my doctoral dissertation, turned into my first book, and the second book, The Jewel House, was a very different kind of book. Because really, when you first write your dissertation, it's sort of like someone in Thomas Chippendale's furniture workshop making a chair for the master, right? It needs to have all the recognizable bells and whistles and signs of a Chippendale chair so that people say, that's a Chippendale chair. And so your first book as an academic is a sort of masterpiece in that sense that you are doing your apprentice. I know how to write like an academic historian. Whereas your second book, you can get a little bit more free. You can have more of a voice because you've already got your bona fides from the first one. And I think it was really in my second academic book that I started experimenting more with storytelling and narrative voice in ways that would not have been possible with my first book because it would have been seen as not appropriately
devotional, to the genre, etc.
Both those books kind of played into your love of kind of history and science and medicine, but you've also got a love of magic and science and the history of those areas. And I find that quite fascinating because, at first blush, they seem like two opposite ends of the spectrum, kind of science and magic. How do you intertwine them? Where does interest come from?
In my second year of college, in university, when I was about 19 years old, I took a course on magic, knowledge, and the pursuit of power in Renaissance Europe. And that was the beginning of, my intellectual journey, because I was absolutely, like you, fascinated with how magic functioned as a technology of power at a time when life was uncertain and unpredictable, and where we were just on the brink of this scientific revolution that at least nominally gave us a sense of control over nature. Just prior to that, they wanted the control, but they simply didn't have the tools and the experimental practices to give them that sense. And magic, it's really helpful to think about it as a technology, not as something entirely woo-woo or supernatural. They just saw it. If they came into this room and I walked over and I hit a light switch over there and that light went off, magic is action at a distance, and as well. And so it's really not that different, and learning that someone like Isaac Newton developed calculus in 18 days and spent decades on alchemical experiments and attempts to recreate the precise dimension of the Temple of Solomon. He didn't see a distinction between magic and science. So a lot of scholarship in the 1980s was really putting out this idea that magic and science were very much more connected, and in some ways the Middle Ages was quite theoretical, and that magic was one of the first practical sciences. And it really shaped magic, alchemy. These were hands-on ways of manipulating the natural world that really we can trace a pretty good through line to experimental science. So I've been studying that essentially since 1983, 84. And, wrote my first book, which was about it, and my second book, which was about all kinds of practices in the city of London, not just magical. And it was after I published that second book that I started writing fiction. And that was completely accidental. It was not intentional. All peace and praise to The Guardian, who, said, oh, well, she's figured out how to monetize the humanities. I wish I was so clever. That was not how it happened, but I always do. It makes me realize in my own scholarship sometimes that I might be giving way too much intentional credit to actors in the past who might have, just like me, just kind of stumbled along into something. And then it becomes like, oh, look what they've done. How clever of them. How clever Shakespeare used that technique. Well, maybe not. Maybe it just woke up on a Tuesday and was like, I'll give that a try.
I was going to ask, because as you say, it wasn't ever your intention to become an author or anything like that. And
no,
I take it you didn't write, apart from, I suppose, what every child does in school or whatever, stories like that, but it wasn't something that you were doing in the background or anything. So what was it that led you to, was it you said you sort of found a bit of a voice, a bit of storytelling in the Jewel House? Was it that? Did you enjoy that process and just want to
I did enjoy that process, and I had, put my book to bed, which, as is this kind of moment where it's both a wonderfully creative time and a really scary time. And I was on vacation in Puerto Vallarta, and no one told me that September in Puerto Vallarta was monsoon season. Right. So when I got off the aircraft and I saw the sheets of water coming down in early September, I thought, well, I should pick up a couple of English language books at the bookshop before I go. And I walked into the bookshop and it was covered with books about witches, vampires, fairies, werewolves, shapeshifters, you name it. And I had been in the library essentially for the past 4 years working on a book. And I thought, what the hell happened? Well, little did I know, because I don't have children, that someone named Stephanie Meyer had written the 4th book in the Twilight series, and it had just come out. And so I'm looking around this bookstore and I'm thinking, John Dee would have loved this selection of books. He would have bought every book.
Yeah.
But we don't normally think we have a lot in common with someone who was alive and well and kicking in 1590. So for me, I picked up not any of these books. I picked up a nonfiction history of Mexico or colonial America. I can't remember, and because I'm kind of a professional nonfiction reader. And I started to, I couldn't let go of this idea that it was very weird for people in 2008 to be obsessed with the same kind of intersection between the supernatural and the real that John Dee had.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, we don't believe that these creatures exist, which is why they're now in the fiction category. But what if John Dee was right and they really do exist? And I started, it was like an academic thought experiment. If you were a vampire, what would you do for a living? I thought immediately, you'd do science, because talk about a long research horizon, right? You can make serious progress. And it grew from that. Well, what could you eat? I just couldn't buy that. If I knew someone and they were a vampire, they had to be able to consume something other than blood, or there would have no social life.
Yeah,
so I'm like, okay, true. They can drink wine. They can eat things wild animals eat, berries and nuts and carpaccio and sashimi, And so it was one step at a time. And then I was there in early September. I came back home. I was still thinking about it. And I started writing my little, speculative thought experimenty things. And people started to talk to each other. And that doesn't happen in an academic book.
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely character first for you then, rather than plot.
Yeah,
It
was character and worldview. I think it probably started with the worldview. And then as I sort of said, well, imagine you're a vampire. What do you do for a living? Where do you live? Does anyone know about you? How did you become a vampire? And then, okay, well, what about witches? What would you do? What would your family be like? Do you like being a witch, given the pretty horrific history about surrounding witches? I personally would not necessarily be incredibly, thrilled and elated if I inherited that magical power, given the track record, especially not if you were a historian, which I was like anthropology, teaching, history, all the things. And I just kind of kept populating the world with other kinds of creatures. And then I needed real characters to put them in sort of situations.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the characters took over.
Brilliant.
And from there, I went to plot. Okay, imagine this happens and this happens and this happens. Just because it was like, I'm a professional student of worldview. That's really what historians of science are. They study, how we look at the world and our place in it. And it was just a sort of amazing process to kind of do that world building worldview and test out its soundness. Okay, well, wait a minute. If you can have wine, does wine make you drunk if you're a vampire? Well, no. Okay, what would your genes, what happened if you were in a car accident and they took a blood test? What would happen? Vampires have to be in car accidents. It's not conceivably possible that they've never wandered into, been taken in an ambulance to a hospital. What happens then? So it was a lot of fun. And then by about November, I had over 100 pages. And that was when I was like, whoa, I think I'm writing a novel.
Yeah.
And of course, at that point, whoever thinks they're going to get published, not me. I just thought, well, this is really fun and I don't know what my next research project is. So I'm just going to keep going until I run out of steam or get bored or figure out what I should be doing in a library.
And it sounds like the process for what became, I presume, a discovery of witches, it started out very much like your non-fiction stuff to begin with, because it was that sort of worldview first approach, and you were just a thought experiment, as you said. So when it came to actually saying, hold on, wait, this is a novel, did you pause at that point and sort of try and work out an outline and plan it all out at that stage, or did you just keep going and with the experiment almost, but with these characters now that you knew, I suppose, and had built up?
I have never outlined anything in my life.
Okay.
I get so obsessed with the outline expectations. I don't color well inside the lines. Mm-hmm. And I will spend 5.5 hours figuring out, is this a sub point of number 2 on the outline, or is this a new point?
Yeah.
And 5 hours later, I'll still be sitting there wondering this, and nothing has gotten done.
Like,
are you guys, are you plotters? Are you outliners, or are you more?
No, I mean, not massively. Kind of points on I'll have points I want to hit, maybe an ending, but I definitely find the more I plan, the less fun it is to write. Too much planning almost kind of sucks the joy or the surprise out of it for me, I think.
I used to be much more rigid in terms of planning, but I found for the book I wrote most recently, it was much more, I did a lot of research and it sort of all built in my head who these characters were and stuff. And I did have some points, like Tariq says, where I wanted to hit certain things, but I do think that being a bit looser with these sorts of things is helpful to the process a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's helpful for all kinds of writing to have that sensible, this is what I want to accomplish, or this is the question I want to ask. In my fiction, you're absolutely right. It's very question-based. It's very much like a nonfiction writer. Mm-hmm. I think that actually really helps me with like plot and stakes for characters, because I don't come in with something I know. I come in with a question, and then I go on that journey of discovery, which gets back to your point, Tariq, about the kind of all the joy goes out for me. If I do an outline, I basically figure things out in order to outline them. And then there's nothing, I'm done. Like, in my head, I've answered the question and I've kind of lost interest and have another question, which isn't always a bad thing. But I agree with both of you that part of, I think, what makes for really good, fresh writing is to just kind of get to that place where you're ready to just start writing and you're no longer preparing to write. Yeah. I think preparing to write is an enormous time suck and trap for writers.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because you feel like you're doing stuff and making progress, but you're actually not even starting.
It's just procrastination a lot of the time.
It is procrastination. I think it's exactly right. So when you'd written this book, this first draft or so, what did you do at that point? Was your first draft kind of almost like a kind of rough plan, and then was it a case of redrafting it, or were you pretty happy with it at that point?
Well, first I had to tell my agent that I was not actually writing a book proposal for a new a new academic book, and that I was writing about vampires. And did he want to see it? And he said, I think I'd better. And so I sent it to him, and there was, 200-300 pages, and I wasn't even halfway through part 1 of what I wanted to say, which was, I was like, I think it's more than one book, because I didn't know anything about how novels are paced or structured. Mm-hmm. And I heard nothing for a while. And I finally said, okay, what do you think? And he admitted he had not even opened the attachment because he was terrified it was going to be terrible. And then instead of it because it's always terrible, was basically what he said. Whenever an academic turns to fiction, it rarely ends well. And he didn't want to have to tell me that it was terrible. And because he wanted me to be I was a successful nonfiction writer. Perfect. Instead of being a failed novelist. He was worried about my state of mind. And I said, open the attachment. So he did. And he said, okay. I said, what do you think? And he said, I think you should keep going. So I kept writing. I wrote for 9 months. I wrote a complete draft of A Discovery, which is in 9 months. And it was, wait for it, 1,100 pages.
Oh my God. Jeez.
What did you think when you saw that? Yeah.
Well, I thought it was perfect. And
it's too big to attach. You know what's going on.
My agent explained no one would even look at this book until I took a minimum of 300 to 400 pages out of it. This was August. And I said, okay, great. I'll have it to you in 2 weeks. And he said, no, you need to take like 3 to 4. And I think for him and for a lot of people, that would have meant cutting characters and plot lines. But I went into it with like embroidery scissors. And I just took out wordiness, repetition, over enthusiastic descriptions, too much inner monologue, and all the things that I now know are death to a book. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know they were death to the book. I just knew they were extraneous. They weren't required. And I got it down to 800 pages, at which point my beloved agent said, okay, I will actually submit this now. And we submitted it in early, and he said, now you have to write a 3-page overview. Now you have to write a book pitch. We did all that after there was a draft that had been dramatically cut. Yeah. And of course, then you get a book contract, and people are kindly want to publish your book, and you start all over again, right? With an editor and with, now we need to get another 200 pages out of it or another 150 pages. And I want to see more of this and less of this. And that was when, again, the writing got really hard. That 9 months of writing the first draft was just sort of playful, wonderful, no expectation.
There's exactly no expectation, no deadline, just, you write, you finish it whenever you finish it. It's nice.
Do you think as well, not having the intention almost when you began writing it of being published and it being a book and stuff helped as well, and not having, I suppose, much intention of entering the fiction world, because obviously you were writing in an area that was pop. You said you saw the books, you saw that Twilight was out, everything was that. It was, and often what you hear in this industry is don't chase trends. If you see it, if you see it on the shelves already, it's too late. It's too late, of a thing. Yeah.
That was the era when there were people, like when you went to a publisher's website or an agent's website, it said, I will read anything but pornography, erotica, vampire books, I mean, because it was such an oversaturated market.
Yeah.
What did I know? I mean, I was just interested in what the hell did these people do for a living?
I mean, I suppose it's an example of, the mantra is always, if, as Marco says, if vampire books are big, don't write a vampire book, because by the time your book comes out there, it'll be 3 years later, you'll have missed the trend. But then if you write a really good vampire book, that's okay. And it's that kind of, there's not one perfect rule, and there's always books that buck the trend, etc. So I suppose you obviously just wrote a book that really just managed to cut through that massive wall of please no more Twilight.
Right. And I think for part of it is because I only have like 2 genres in my world, fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was never, I'm writing a fresh take on a fantasy. I wrote fiction. My publisher was Viking. This is famously the press of like Steinbeck. I mean, I was not writing genre fiction. Mm-hmm. I was just writing fiction, and the characters happened to be a historian and a geneticist, and there was a missing manuscript, and one of them was a witch and one of them was a vampire. But that was no different than one being blonde and one having dark hair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was just part of their backstory. It wasn't the driver.
Yeah.
In a way that I think it can be in genre fiction. So I think I was successful in part because of ignorance. I also think that when somebody tells you, oh, don't write that book because that's over. You are actually, you don't want to chase a trend. You are actually now chasing a trend.
Mm-hmm.
You had this book you wanted to do, and now you've been told not to do it. So you're like, okay, then what is the next big thing?
Yeah.
What should I be writing?
Yeah.
You actually do exactly what you weren't intending to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
everybody
I think
wants to chase a trend. So, everybody wants to be on that wave of success. And, it's...
But I don't think there's any way, literally, I think there's no way to predict it. And I think the publishing industry is extremely bad at it historically.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I listen, I have a day job. So I am in the privileged position of not having to feel like my entire income is about chasing the next big thing. If that were the case, I would not be a writer. I would simply not write anymore because that is way too much pressure for me. And I don't know, writing is a hard life. It's a hard lifestyle. When people get published, obviously for a lot of us, that was a monumental shift in our lives. And you don't want to fall back into, being a secretary or whatever it was you were doing before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it becomes economically driven, but that would not be good for me as a writer.
And I think one of the issues as well with listening too hard to that advice about don't chase a trend or whatever, I think that's right. It probably makes sense if you're economically driven to begin with and say, I just want to write a book that will make me money. Don't chase a trend, fine. But if you're not writing a book that you care about, that is a story that you want to tell or characters that you want to, read about or whatever, even if it isn't a trend that is big at the moment or whatever, that'll come across as much more authentic and probably much more readable and engaging to readers, I would have thought.
I don't believe you'll ever rise above the pack. If you are, if you're trying to write a newer, different take on, if you are essentially, I'm going to emulate Leigh Bardugo. I'm going to write a dark academia novel set in Harvard, and it's going to have this happening and not that. And you're never going to, the chances of you being able to, supplant Leigh in that niche, it's always going to be in that sort of tier of books that people say, oh, well, if you like Leigh Bardugo, you'll probably like this. It's not as good as, but it'll scratch those itches.
Yeah.
But you're not going to establish yourself. You are not then setting a trend.
Mm-hmm. No, that's right. Exactly.
That's right.
Because you're always then you are by definition. So these are the tricky issues about writing as a creative act and writing as an economic way of living, of making a career, an author career versus a creative writer.
Yeah. I mean, having said that, your book was massively successful, and it was a huge, it was New York Times bestsellers. I think all of them were New York Times bestsellers, translated into more than 36 languages. I read that your first book hit its 7th printing after just 2 months, which is just insane. I mean, that's crazy. That must have been amazing.
3 in the first week. We were in the 3rd edition in the first week.
That is amazing. And that must have been a real, a proper buzz seeing those kind of numbers.
Oh, Mike. Well, I have, look, they estimate the average readership for an academic article is 2 people.
Oh, is that right?
So it was on a scale that was so massive I couldn't take it in. And to this day, I've only ever seen one person with my book,
really?
any book. One.
Is that right? Just from... Did you approach
them? So there's a part of me that still believes this is all fictional.
It's just numbers on the screen.
It's just numbers that somebody reports. And like, how do I know? I've never seen any evidence of this. It's a bit like magic. So they were huge sellers. And again, like, keep in mind, this is after everybody who's proclaimed vampires are dead.
Yeah,
exactly.
Totally.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and it really spread by word of mouth. It got a lot of initial really wonderful and supportive press buzz of people saying, okay, this is not your child's vampire book.
Mm-hmm.
This is what the New York Times at some point called, Harry Potter for grown-ups. This is proper adult stuff. Do not give this to your 12-year-old. This is not the book for them. So it was amazing. And then I started trying to figure out what it was, why this book had the great good fortune to rise above and capture attention and then keep it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And did you work that out?
Be a flash. Yeah, did you?
Yeah. And I think, honestly, it's about what we've been talking about. Yeah. It's because it came from an authentic place.
Mm-hmm.
It was never about following a genre convention, a reader expectation. This is what they want. This was a story I could tell and wanted to tell that was about difference, the power of being different in a world that is very inhospitable, whether it's because you're neurodiverse or because you come from a family background that, people look down on, or because you have a disease. And that's really what the books were about. It was about that diversity may save us as a world, and that we live in a world in which everybody's trying to be like the next person.
Mm. Yeah.
Is that quite important for you, that kind of idea of using a kind of fantasy setting to explore these real world issues, and to, like a lot of classic sci-fi did, back in the day of Star Trek, etc., and taking these kind of moral questions and following them down the line and seeing where it takes, and trying to learn moral lessons, etc.
Yeah, because monsters are good to think with, because we have very definite feelings that are rooted in, I don't like my neighbor. My neighbor is different. My neighbor, he makes me uncomfortable, or she makes, I'm afraid of her. And yet, based on the evidence at the Puerto Vallarta airport, everybody wanted a boyfriend who was a vampire. Like, they won't date their next door neighbor who is a different race or a different religion.
Yeah.
But give me a vampire. That's what I want. And I was just like, are you nuts?
That's so true. That's very good. Yeah.
So and I find, as a historian and as an educator, I find those contact points, those clashes, fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of where the conflict comes for my characters and in my books, because I am looking at really big issues and then thinking through those issues with monsters rather than ordinary people, because as soon as they're ordinary people, people get very judgy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
if you're a vampire, nobody gets judgy.
Yeah, that's right. It allows you to fully explore something like that, as you say. Otherwise, if you did it in a real setting, then you would obviously probably upset someone in some way that is not going to go down well in some way.
No, I mean, if I had written this story literally and Matthew had not been a vampire, it would have been panned by romance readers who would be like, this is not a real romance. She falls in love really fast, and he's incredibly abusive. But what I wanted to say was, why is it that women are even attracted to that narrative?
Mm-hmm.
And is it okay to be attracted to it, as Diana was for a while, and then wake up one day and say, you know what? I am not going to rugby because I hate rugby. And I've been playing along and pretending I liked rugby for 2 months and I'm done now. For me, you get to fall stoppy in love, but you got to have a moment of saying, I'm not going to be somebody I'm not anymore. Mm-hmm. If this relationship is going to go anywhere, you got to accept me for who I am. Do it with a witch and a vampire, and suddenly it's like people have a point of view, and it's not judgy. It's not about, well, I had a boyfriend who told me what to do and it ended badly.
Yeah.
And so that's, as an educator, as a professional educator, that's, then that's my special sauce, to get people to
Yep.
think through things they thought they knew, but actually it turns out maybe they didn't.
Exactly. And obviously Discovery of Witches, as we said, was massive. It was obvious also, from what you said, very, very long. But did you have an idea for a trilogy, or did you not have that in your head? You had,
no,
or did you just have a vague idea of where you wanted to go with these characters or something?
I had an idea for a book in 3 parts.
Right.
It just turned out, because, that's a classic way to structure something. Mm-hmm. Part 1, part 2, part 3. And it turns out that part 1 was a book, part 2 was a book, and part 3 was a book. But in my naivete, I thought I could accomplish all of it within one.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was literally 1 book in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty soon after finishing A Discovery of Witches, I thought, well, I know what happens after part 3. And then I know what happens after that. And, so it has just kind of grown, and it will continue to grow as long as I feel like I'm able to do something different and look at different questions, and that I'm not becoming one of the authors who just keep churning stuff out well past its sell date.
Mm.
Right. Yeah. I should also point out, Discovery of Witches, even though I was already halfway through Shadow of Night and knew what happened in part 3, Discovery of Witches was a solitary book purchase. It was not purchased as a trilogy.
Right, okay.
Witches was purchased. And it wasn't until very close to publication of Witches that I went under contract for books 2 and 3. And that's, I think, when it became a trilogy.
Okay.
And I kept saying, there's more books, and this is going to be really confusing. Maybe we call it a series. It was a trilogy. And so now I say the trilogy is the first 3 books in the series,
Exactly.
I mean, that's quite a bold thing, I suppose, being kind of halfway through writing book 2, not knowing if there was ever going to be a book 2 or not. But was that just that kind of part of your brain that was like, I just need to get this out? You've been living with it in your head for so long, I need to put it on paper. So even if it doesn't go anywhere and no one else ever reads it, I need to put it on paper.
Well, yeah, because I was still writing the book I set out to write, which just happened to be 3 books.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so for me, it wouldn't have been, my questions were still unresolved.
Mm-hmm.
And my plan for my book was still in its infancy. It was only 1/3 done. My book was 1/3 done. And so, yeah.
And interesting, like, just thinking about that as a writer, as a process type thing, that you viewed it as 1 book, but obviously it comes out as 3 books. Did in the publishing process, in the editing process, working with your editor, did it have to be refined? Obviously, because to make these books work as single books, I know you said you had it as 3 acts, but did you have the same sort of endings in mind as you did, or did you sort of change those slightly to work as single books?
No, it ended exactly where it ended in my head.
Yeah.
Except that in my head, there was a final chapter that was basically how the story of Diana and Matthew ends, i.e., much further in the time continuum down. And I was like, okay, so now, and then there's this, and they said, oh no, we want, isn't there a fourth book? Isn't there, so at that point, so I actually know how it all ends.
Mm.
And my idea was to actually put that as a kind of little coda at the end of the Book of Life. Instead, it's just parked as, be careful what you're, when people say, well, how is it going to end? I say, well, be careful what you wish for, because when that happens, when I write that, it's over.
That's it.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, because you've written Time's Convert, which is the novella, which I know is kind of a little bit of a prequel and a sequel to the kind of the trilogy as it is.
And the new
but
one.
What's that's you've got there.
The I'm trying to hold it up, but my Zoom isn't playing ball. Blackbird Oracle, obviously.
Yeah.
It's the newest. Do you want to tell us a bit about the Blackbird Oracle?
Well, the Blackbird Oracle, I was experimenting with a dual timeline in Time's Convert, which is not something I'd done. And because I and my readers are fascinated with character backstories. So I tried doing a kind of dual timeline way of advancing the characters in the present while also telling us something about a character's past, or two characters' past, as a matter of fact, that I felt like was really important information that people needed to know and context as the story went forward. And then I started simultaneously writing a bunch of other books that took a character backstory in order to move this whole storyline forward, to explain things, to put things in context. One was about the character Gallowglass, one was about Matthew, and one was about Diana's parents, Stephen Proctor and Rebecca Bishop. And I thought I was done with the one about Matthew. I had started the one about Marcus. Those weren't really gelling, and a dual timeline was really not my friend. So I had to have a think. So I picked up the Proctor book, and what I realized was that the next book needed to be the Blackbird Oracle, which is about plugging the enormous plot hole that I carefully left in the books that had to do with, what about the Proctors? My working title for the book was Meet the Proctors. Because Diana, we know a lot about the Bishops, and we've met Stephen. We know nothing about his family. Was he just airdropped by a stork out of the sky? So I was, as the years went by, I got more and more fascinated with the fact that almost no one seemed to comment on what I thought was a pretty big plot hole. And so the Blackbird Oracle is Meet the Proctors. It's about what happens when Diana finds out that her father has living relatives, and that they are deeply ingrained in a culture of higher magic, which Diana thinks of as darker magic. Mm-hmm. They've stayed in the Salem, Ipswich, Essex County area. They are unapologetically witches. None of this Bishop family, let's blend in and keep our head down. And it opens up Diana to a part of her family, her legacy, her magic, her power that is much darker and requires a great deal more maturity than 7 years earlier when she called a book out of the library. I mean, she and Matthew have been in a relationship for 7 years. Her children are on the brink of being 7. And suddenly up pops this whole new family and just destabilizes everything they know. And the stakes are not only high for Diana, but for the children, and then by extension for Matthew as well, who's, relationship power shifts back and forth in a relationship for it to be healthy. And Matthew had a lot of the power going into the series. And The Blackbird Oracle is about Diana reaching the age of 40 and starting to have to make decisions about herself and her future that are not so tightly wound up with what's good for Matthew and what's good for her kids, which I think is a fascinating moment in any human being's life if they have children. That moment when you say, wait a minute, I can't keep doing it this way. There's got to be something for me. And discovering what that is for Diana and what Matthew's response to it. Spoiler alert, it's not great. Because who likes a power shift? Nobody, right? Nobody wants to lose power. So, and again, it's one thing to talk about it in human terms, but if you add some hexes and curses into the mix, suddenly somebody else getting an upper hand power-wise takes on a different kind of
different sort of
significance.
Power you're talking about,
Exactly. What kind of power?
It sounds like that the Blackbird Oracle almost grew out of, you mentioned it was a plot hole. And it grew out of what you were talking about before, which is your process, which is asking questions. And so when you say it was a plot hole, was it a plot hole that you noticed yourself? It wasn't intentionally left there, or was it intentionally left there?
Oh, I intentionally left it there because there was no way. I needed to establish Diana's relationship with magic, with being a weaver, with not fitting into the magical community. I couldn't just throw her into the deep end of the pool.
Mm-hmm.
I needed to build a world that made sense and would hold up the deeper end of the pool.
Yeah.
And so it really, I had written a lot of scenes and a lot of exchanges and filled a lot of notebooks with backstory for these characters, family trees, character sketches, everything. As I went along, when I would get to a point and think, oh, well, that's explained by the Proctors.
Right.
I would write it down, and then that was all decanted. And that's the same thing I have done for the ones that delve into Matthew's backstory or Gallowglass's story or Fernando's story or any of the other characters who I still have questions about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I find that fascinating when you're creating a world like that, a sort of universe or world or whatever, that you the author, you're telling a certain story in that world, but you have so much more information that you're keeping from the readers to help you tell your story that you're telling at that time, but also as, it's all good, as you say, it's all good material potentially for the future as well, if you want to go and explore something like that.
Yeah, I mean, how do you both deal with that kind of what in the television business is called, someone's emotional hinterland? I mean, how do you two deal with that in terms of, do you have everything on the page, or is there a hinterland of things that inform?
Yeah. There's definitely... I think, it must be in most cases. There's always a hinterland of stuff that you're... I will generally carry that in my head as much, which is probably a stupid thing to do. But, I kind of think, oh, no, that character wouldn't do that, or that, oh, no, he can't do that because of this thing that happened or whatever. If it's something big, then I probably will note it down and think about how to interweave it if necessary. But often I'm trying to carry, but I think when you're creating something like you are, which is such a vast world over a number of books, that becomes almost impossible, I suspect, and you do have to be able to write it down somewhere else so that you can reference it if needs be.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think on those days when you just don't feel like writing, the hinterland is your friend, because you can sit there and think, what is Matthew's relationship to the Impressionists? Does he like Impressionists? Whatever it might be, And you learn things about your characters in the oddest ways. And
that'll spark off ideas for plot, etc., won't it?
Exactly. And so even if it's not directly, you're not lifting it. Sometimes you're really lucky and it becomes the scene, but you're not always. I was at the Crime Writers Festival in London last month, and I listened to Anne Cleves, who, of course, wrote the fabulous series with the protagonist Vera, the detective. And, she was talking about how she knows what Vera ate for breakfast as a child. And she knows so much of that hinterland, and that it's informs everything. And it's fascinating to me because as a nonfiction writer, one of the things I have to tell my students is don't take your reader on your intellectual journey, on your intellectual pilgrimage. No one cares. What they want to do is to know what your findings are and for you to tell a compelling, argumentative story about them. They don't want well, this happened and then that happened. I literally say to them, this much. I want you to put 1/4 of that on the page.
Yeah.
And I need you to do the work of distilling what is important.
Yeah.
And I think that actually is a useful thing for fiction writers to think about as well. You should just be generating loads of crap.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's often, especially so like I write historical stuff, and you've got a lot of research there, but it's trying to pick what you put on the page, and not, as you say, you're not wanting to bore the reader because you read a 200-page book. You don't want to put all of that in there. You've just got to pick out the sentiment or the important bit for your story.
Yeah.
And I mean, when it was adapted, because I wanted to ask you about the TV adaptation, and that must have really been an example of distilling it even further, because then you've got 60-minute episodes or whatever, and you're having to cut out even more stuff and get down to just getting stuff in the dialogue, and it's taken that quarter and making it even smaller, and yet still trying to get the gist and the feel of the characters and the story with much less.
Yeah, and it's very much a process of taking everything apart that you've worked very, very hard to make work together in an integrated and seamless fashion. And so you have heaps of parts everywhere, and then trying to reassemble them, and like making flat pack furniture. You know how you're always left with this pile of stuff that somehow didn't end up in the furniture, and you think, oh God, I hope none of that was essential. And that's what it's like. It's like building flat pack furniture. And it is hard as the writer, because what they will often do are just cut whole subplots and whole characters. Because that's easier, right? That's a whole pile of parts that has to do with the character we don't think is really important. And I'm saying, you actually really need that character if you are going to want to go forward with this story. And they say, oh, well, we have to make good, we have to focus on what's going to make good television right now. I said, okay, but please note, by cutting that character, you have actually totally made it impossible for you to go forward with the story past the book you've read. Like, if you want to know what's good, for the next book and the book after, that minor character is actually crucially important.
Yeah.
But there's, they're like, nope, I don't need those parts. Those parts don't make sense. I need this big box of parts. And then they reconstruct it in a way that fits their space, time, and most importantly, budgetary constraints. We're cheap. We get to do whatever the heck we want.
Yeah, it's true.
For nothing.
You've got an unlimited budget in your mind. That's absolutely.
A million
That's
helicopters. Right. Yeah, exactly. Special effects. No, exactly. Anything you want.
But I suppose that I was just going to say that shows the skill of a good adaptation, doesn't it? That
Yes,
people can
definitely.
do that, and as you say, cut out huge bits, but it's still
Still
in
works.
essence is the same. It brings through what is great about a story. Sometimes of
Well,
course
and I
it
still
fails
think one of
miserably,
the
but yeah.
yeah, I still think one of the most amazing screenwriters of an adaptation was Emma Thompson. Her Sense and Sensibility
Yeah.
was a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
And it was an adaptation of a much loved and extremely wordy
Yeah.
novel. And she clearly, in my opinion, was so familiar with the novel and so clear on what was important about the novel for readers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes think that can be challenging in a television and film environment, because what they're often doing is they're trying to get on screen the visual bits.
Mm-hmm.
But those may not be the part that's important to a reader.
No, that's
and so
right.
when a reader watches it, they're like, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't need that. I needed this.
If someone
other
comes in
thing.
and says, this book's a blueprint for my show, but they're not a fan, or they've not loved the book in the same way that a reader has, they don't bring the same things across. Those are things that get left out.
Well, they all say they're fans.
Yeah, they'll always say that. Yeah,
and they all say that they really care about the readers and keeping it as faithful as possible.
Yeah,
but I don't think. I think that very seldom happens.
Mm-hmm.
Would you ever want to move into that world yourself and work on scripts or screenplays?
I love that world. I love collaborative creativity. But it is a world, and I love writing dialogue. So I like to think I would be, my books are very visual, and and they're very heavy dialogue, which should mean that would be a natural fit for me. But I think there's a lot of suspicion in the industry about, letting writers work on screenplays, because we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
This is always funny to me because, of course, our content is in great demand and people always want to buy it from us. But apparently, I wrote nonfiction, and I see that as an absolutely essential skill set for my fiction. I write nonfiction and fiction, and I would think those would be incredibly useful skill sets to writing a screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
But I sometimes feel as though screenplays are seen as like a special thing, that you're a screenwriter or you're not. And I wonder if that can possibly be true. Nobody said to Shakespeare, "You're a playwright, don't write sonnets."
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously different skills you need to bring to it, and it's a different technical document, I guess. And at the end of the day, but I guess there is, it's almost as you say, it's like an outsider, if you like, coming into their world, and they don't want to let that happen sometimes. But there's no reason I can see that an author couldn't at least attempt to write a screenplay, and they could see what it was like or something.
I'm working on film and television projects where I'm adapting someone else's work.
Right. Okay.
And I love it.
Mm-hmm.
But it really matters to me that I am honoring what I believe the author set out to do. Not what I think they should have done, not what I think will make good television, I first and foremost want to know that I am honoring the core of what that writer intended.
Yeah.
And that's part of my nonfiction training.
Mm-hmm.
In my world, you do not criticize someone for the book you wish they'd written. Your criticism is limited to understanding what the book was that they set out to write and evaluating how successfully they did that.
I agree.
And this is one of the, and like we teach you to do this in graduate school. So the idea that you read a book and like you say, well, if they'd done this and that and this, it would have been a good book. Well, guess what? That's not the book they were trying to write.
Yeah.
No, I get very irritated at film reviews that criticize a film for not being what the person thought it was going to be, when it's clearly not the film that the person was trying to set out to make. As you say, it by all means criticize the outcome of what their intention was. I think there is a room for critical insight into these things, but when you're trying to project something onto it that it wasn't trying to be in the first place, that's where I have an issue.
Seems very unfair.
Yeah.
I was asked to interview Joyce, one of Joyce Carol Oates' books for National Public Radio, and I wrote it. And I wrote it from the way I was trained to write it, which was about, this is what I believe Joyce was trying to do. This is what I believe was really super effective about it. This is the part that I felt maybe wasn't so much, like where it kind, because nobody manages to execute the dream of what they were trying to do. None of us do.
Yeah.
But that, and like always, if you're looking for a book like this is a perfect book for you. And I remember after they taped me reading the interview, they said, I can't tell if you liked it or not. And I said that I did my job. As a reviewer, it is not an ego piece for me to tell you how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a vehicle to so that a reader of your review can figure out if they think they will like it or not.
I think that I totally agree with that. And that's why I always, the reviews that I always like the most, whether it's a book or a game or a film, whatever, is the ones where I can read a review and I can think, right, I understand the shortcomings that this person had, but from my point of view, I don't think I would have those. I'm able to put myself and say, well, I think I'll still like this more than this person did, because he's able to explain the reasoning why it didn't work or what the intention was, and I'm saying, well, I can get past that. So I think you're right. I think it is about taking yourself out of the equation and just trying to talk about the actual content and the aim and the art as a whole, as opposed to what one person wished it was or thought about.
And I think that's so important for anyone listening to this who is a writer or an aspiring writer, because we are in an incredibly review-rich culture.
Yeah.
Everyone can review everything in any way they want to. And we don't respond, we can't react, we can't say anything, because the culture now is everybody has a right to their opinion, which is true. But as an author, you need to distinguish between someone who is genuinely giving you a critical review of your work, versus, which are rare, even in major print media, versus someone who is telling you how they feel.
Yeah.
Because that's not a review.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's an opinion piece, but it's not a review. And if a writer takes it on as a review, oh my God, she wants elves and fairies. I need to put elves and fairies in my book. And she doesn't want it to be a heterosexual couple. I need to delve into LGBTQ characters. You're going to end up with a complete mess because you're writing on spec.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I totally agree.
So the Blackbird Oracle is just out, but I just wanted to ask quickly, what is in the pipeline? Are you already working on the next one?
I've actually finished the first draft of the next one.
Excellent.
And it is at the time this airs, it had better be on my editor's desk because it's going to go into production. And I am already working on the next book, and I've got a partial draft. And I've begun to wrestle with the 2 books that are coming out after that, which are linked in specific ways. So, yeah, fueled by questions. That's my writing life in a nutshell. It's all about questions and finding answers and somehow managing to make those answers entertaining for a reader.
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, I really like the approach and that you've got. So, and it sounds like, there's still lots to come. So your readers can look forward to that. But on the subject,
one of these days, I want to write a historical like you. Just a straight up, I just want to write a historical.
Yeah.
That would be fun. No vampires needed, So I got lots of things I want to do, but I think that's true for any true writer.
Yeah, there's always
not
something else you want to. Yeah, definitely, 100%.
Yeah, for sure.
On the subject of questions, we always like to end every podcast by asking our guests the same questions, just to see the variety of answers that we get. So, what was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read was fictional or non-fictional?
Whatever you want.
Does it matter?
No.
I'm actually still reading. I'm reading a lot about the Sackvilles. I'm reading about Vita Sackville West.
Okay.
And so I'm writing. Yeah. I like real I don't read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of nonfiction because I find the characters fascinating. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Excellent.
So.
Nice. And what about the last film that you watched?
Does it need to be on television or in the cinema?
No,
any
medium. Yeah.
I watched Argyle and I loved it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. It does look like quite a fun ride, I have to say.
For a writer, you gotta see Argyle. It's the best.
Okay, excellent. That's a ringing endorsement. And what was the last TV show that you watched, or what TV show are you watching at the moment?
I watched a rerun of the fabulous Miss Marples with Joan Hickson, and God, Agatha Christie could tell a story.
Yeah,
man, she is so fascinated with the interactions of human beings.
Yeah, that's a writer I've shamefully never read any of her books.
I've never read them either.
Tariq. How can
I know, it's disgusting. I need to I need to read it.
But guess what, guys? I've never read Jane Austen. I've only ever seen the film.
I feel that's fine. I feel that they're close enough.
I do too, because it's all storytelling,
Exactly.
But my God, her, I think Agatha Christie is very like Jane Austen. I like seeing both of them on screen because you get these rich visuals of social interaction and these complicated drawing rooms or whatever.
Yeah.
And that is my jam. I just, I love that.
Excellent.
Nice. Well, the very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or. And I always say there's no right answer here, perhaps, apart from perhaps one of them. But we'll start off with, let's go for vampires or witches.
Witches.
Nice.
TV or cinema?
TV.
I'm going to give you another one. Anne Rice or Stephanie Meyer?
Anne Rice.
I figured that was going to be the answer.
I mean, those are my vampires.
Yeah.
I was too old to be caught up in Twilight. Anne Rice, I was there for, and her Witching Hour books.
Oh, yeah.
The first book I ever stayed up all night to read was the first book in the Mayfair Witches series.
Nice.
And I was in graduate school, and I was up all night. I couldn't put it down.
Yeah, it's amazing when you find a book like that.
Yeah.
Night owl or early bird?
Bit of both. Often I only get about 5 hours of sleep for this reason, but yeah.
Fancy restaurant or a takeaway?
Fancy restaurant.
And nice. Music or no music when you're writing?
Music. Absolutely essential for being able to have character through lines emotionally if you're writing something over many days or months.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the very, very last one, paper book or ebook?
Paper book.
Oh, everyone always picks paper book. Nobody ever picks
Listen, I am like I think I might be the last person on the planet who actually, I don't do digital cameras. Digital calendars. Mine are handwritten. And
fair enough.
All my books, notebooks. I'm a historian of manuscript culture.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly.
I'm sure know who am I talking to. There's no chance. There's no chance you're going to pick.
Good news is we're going to give you a new notebook to write in as well. So that's the good thing.
Yay! Because there is nothing better than a new notebook. When you said that my ears were like, I get a thank you gift? This is sensational.
Well, thanks very much, Deborah. That was really interesting and a lot of fun as well.
That was great fun.
That was amazing. How I love talking to writers about writers.
Yeah.
About writing.
Yeah. Good fun.
I love talking to writers about writing because it's something we don't have a chance to do very much. So thank you for your podcast.
Well, thanks very much to Deborah for coming on to the podcast. I really enjoyed that chat. And, just amazing, first of all, the numbers that, as we said at the start, the
stuff of dreams, isn't it? It's just the stuff of dreams when it comes to writing.
It really is. And, I think interesting sort of tangent we went off on there talking about reviews and, what is a review for? Reviews are important, obviously, but as she said, nowadays anyone can review anything, but a lot of them aren't actually reviews, they're opinion pieces. And I think it is important for authors, for their own mental health, to realise that there is a difference between those things, and not to listen to all the noise, really, I think. And reviews can help readers if they're reviewing the material objectively and not try to bring their own thing to the review. Like, as I said, it always irritates me when I read film reviews in particular, where the reviewer seems annoyed that the film isn't what they thought it was going to be, even though clearly the film was never setting out to be that type of film. And things.
And I always think the best type of review is something where the person gives, whether it's an opinionated piece or not, but their take on something in such a way that I can then decide myself, interpret it. Well, I know how I align with that reviewer, so I know, or from his piece, I know if I'll agree with it or not, or if I know if I'll like something, even though he didn't. I'll know if I'll be able to see past whatever flaws he's identified. For you.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I suppose you get to know certain reviewers and you know their tastes.
That absolutely, absolutely.
You can take that on board when you're hearing.
And also, sometimes reviews don't seem to, as you say, people put a lot of stock in them, and I think they do kind of dominate, especially when you're starting out. They dominate, and you want to find them all and stuff. But ultimately, sometimes they just don't matter. How many crap things have we seen and read that have been massive successes that have reviewed badly, and vice versa? There's sometimes I think the correlation between a good or bad review and its success or failure isn't as obvious as you might think.
No, absolutely. But where reviews do help, Tariq? On podcasts.
You're on top form with your segues right now, Mark. This is excellent stuff.
We really would appreciate it if you could, especially as this is the last podcast before we go into a break, if you could take the time to give us a rating and, more importantly, a review. If it's good. If you don't like us, that's fine. Keep that to yourself. But if it's a good review, please do take the time to review us on Apple Podcasts or whatever your favorite podcast app is, because it really, really does help us reach more people. It helps the algorithm pull us out and show us to more people, but also just good reviews. If people stumble across us, help people to tune in and find something that hopefully is useful to them, and it helps us to continue to get great guests on the podcast. So that's a heartfelt plea for some good reviews there, please.
And if you want to get in touch, perhaps you just want to tell us how bad we are, don't put it into a review, just send it to us in an email instead. You can get to us podcast at rightgear.co.uk, or just search any social media platform for at UK Page One, or on YouTube as Page One Podcast.
Yes, indeed. And I should have said, of course, the Blackbird Oracle, the latest book in the Also series, is of course out now, and it will put a link in the podcast description so you can pick that one up. So yeah, thanks again to Deborah for coming on to the podcast. As I said at the start, we are going to take a break before we come back with a marvelous...
It's going to be so big. Big Spielberg, but bigger.
Marvelous episode 200. So yeah, we will be back in a few weeks with that. But in the meantime, hope you have a great time. If you're looking for something to listen to, we have a massive back catalogue there, so you can always tune in for that. But otherwise, we will speak to you in a few weeks.
See you later.
Thank you so much for listening to today's conversation with Nadine Matheson. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a brand new episode featuring more amazing guests. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a review. It really helps the podcast grow. And if you'd like to support the show, you can buy me a cup of coffee or sign up on Patreon. The links are in the show notes. And if you'd love to join the conversation as a guest, feel free to send an email to theconversation@NadineMatheson.com. Thanks again for your support, and I'll catch you next time.